This story is titled, Gave Mom an Expensive Gift for Her Birthday, but She Threw It Away, Called Me a Failure. So I took back the gift and told her what was inside the box. Now she won't stop calling. Hi everyone! Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey guys, 30 female, thought about posting this a million times, but it always felt like too much to unpack. As I'm thinking about everything happened, I think I was too young to understand how fragile life really was. I mean, when you're a kid, you just assume everything stays the same. But sometimes it just takes one day, one moment, to flip everything on its head. That morning felt ordinary. I was 12 and Dad, already dressed for work, ruffled my hair. Morning, Ellie. Ready for school? He asked. Yeah, I guess, I mumbled, half asleep. Mom sat at the table, glued to her tablet, barely acknowledging him as he kissed her cheek. See you later, Jen, he said. But she only muttered, uh-huh. They hadn't been talking much lately, like they lived in separate worlds. As I grabbed my backpack, Dad smiled. Dinner's on me Friday. You pick the place. I grinned, thinking about my favorite pizza spot. It was the last time I saw my dad. The day went on like usual. I sat through classes doodling in my notebook instead of paying attention. Then suddenly, during my last class, the principal came and asked me to follow her to her office. When we got there, Mom was already sitting in one of the chairs. She looked normal. She wasn't crying, but she was holding a tissue in her hand. Ellie, she started, your dad passed away today. I froze. Passed away? What did that even mean? What? I managed to ask. She sighed, like she didn't want to have to explain. He collapsed at work. They think it was a heart attack. My dad was only 43. He wasn't sick or anything. He was strong, always lifting heavy stuff at work and going on hikes with me during the summer. How could he just not be here anymore? Mom leaned over and patted my back awkwardly. I know it's hard, she said, like she was reading from a script. We'll get through this. That night, the house felt emptier than ever. I didn't understand how someone could just be gone. One minute he was there, drinking his coffee and cracking jokes, and the next, he wasn't. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered downstairs to get some water. That's when I heard Mom talking on the phone in the living room. She was talking to her friend, and I heard her saying, Honestly, Marlene, she said, this might be a blessing in disguise. Being a widow is so much easier than going through a messy divorce. She kept talking, and I couldn't help but listen. Now I don't have to deal with lawyers or splitting anything. The house is mine. The savings are mine. I'll just play the grieving widow for a while. It's not like anyone will question it. I felt like I was going to throw up as I stood there in the dark hallway. Was this real? Did my mom just say that? She laughed, a smug laugh, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad, the man who had done everything for her, was gone, and she was already thinking about what she could gain from it. The funeral was a blur. I wore a black dress that didn't fit quite right because we'd bought it last minute. People kept coming up to me saying how sorry they were, how much Dad meant to them. Mom sat at the front, dabbing her eyes with a tissue every so often. To everyone else, she looked like a grieving widow. Aunt Marcy was the only one who seemed to see through it. She pulled me aside after the service and hugged me tight. You're going to be okay, Ellie, she said softly. You're stronger than you know. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure how. After the funeral, the house felt like a ghost town. It wasn't just Dad's absence that made it feel empty, though that alone was like a giant hole in the middle of everything. But something heavier lingered. Mom couldn't even look at me without her face twisting into something between disgust and pity. You look just like him, she snapped once. No wonder you're so awkward. She treated me like I didn't belong, as if everything I did was a reminder of the life she wanted to erase. The more she threw herself into cleaning out Dad's things and redecorating the house, the clearer it became. She wasn't just grieving. She was rebuilding. And I wasn't part of the blueprint. The day after the memorial, Mom started making changes. She went through Dad's closet, pulled out all his clothes and dumped them in black trash bags. A week later, she started talking about making renovations to the house. We need to move forward, Ellie, she said one morning over breakfast. The living room could really use a fresh coat of paint. Maybe something brighter, more cheerful. Every time I tried to stop her, she brushed me off. So I kept silent. As the weeks went on, the changes kept coming. It was like she was erasing him, bit by bit, until there was nothing left. I tried to talk to Aunt Marcy about it one night when I stayed over at her house. She's acting like Dad didn't even matter. Marcy said, Your mom's always been complicated, she said carefully. I know this isn't easy for you, Ellie, but just remember, you're not responsible for how she copes. You've got to focus on yourself, okay? I nodded, but her words didn't make me feel any better. 3 months after Dad's memorial, my mom decided to surprise me. We were eating dinner together, just the two of us, like always. So, she started, not looking up. I've been seeing someone. I gave her a glare. I was totally shocked. What? She glanced at me and said casually, I met someone at work, she said, like it was no big deal. His name is Mark. He's very kind and stable. I think you'll like him. I stared at her. So you're dating? Yes, Ellie, she said, rolling her eyes. I'm not dead. I remember feeling disgusted at that moment. I didn't know how to respond. It had been just 3 months since Dad had died, and she was already moving on like he'd been a phase in her life instead of her husband. And just like that, I started coming home to find Mark having dinner with my mom. Mark was a middle-class guy with a steady job. He wasn't flashy or wealthy, but he could afford things we usually didn't, like brand-name sneakers for his kids, or the occasional weekend trip to the mountains. It was clear Mom saw potential in him, not just as a partner, but as someone who could elevate her life in ways Dad never could. She latched onto him quickly, her behavior shifting almost overnight. Suddenly, she was cooking elaborate meals, the kind we never had growing up. Mark had 2 kids from his previous marriage, which he mentioned casually the first time we met. He said it like it was no big deal, but the moment stuck with me. I couldn't help but wonder what they were like and how they fit into this new dynamic. Dinners quickly became awkward. Mom laughed at all of Mark's jokes, her laugh a little too high-pitched and forced, and she kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to join in. Mark, on the other hand, didn't say much to me. He kept his distance, only asking a few questions about school before going back to his meal. Over time, I got used to him being around, even if it still felt off. He wasn't mean or unkind, just distant. I didn't know if it was intentional or if he just didn't know how to connect with me. Either way, I learned to keep my interactions with him surface level, nodding and answering when necessary, but never offering much. Then, one evening, everything shifted. Mom announced it. Ellie, Mark and I are getting married, she said, smiling like a teenager. Isn't it wonderful? I didn't know what to say. It wasn't wonderful. It wasn't even okay. But Mom was looking at me with that expectant expression, the one that told me she wasn't asking for my opinion. She was telling me how I was supposed to feel. That's great, I said, forcing a smile. Mark and Mom got married in a small ceremony a few months later. My mom seemed lighter, happier, like she was trying on a new personality that fit better than the one she'd had with Dad. After the wedding, Mark and his kids, Bryce and Olivia, moved into our house. That's when everything really started to change. When Mark and his kids moved in, Mom threw herself into making them feel at home. New clothes, fancy meals, even redecorating their rooms, while I was left with hand-me-downs and silence. I've done enough for you, she'd say whenever I asked for anything. Why don't you try earning your keep for once? It was clear she was building a new family, and I wasn't part of it. Bryce and Olivia were close to my age. Bryce was 14 and Olivia was 13, but we couldn't have been more different. They both came with a lot of stuff, designer clothes, high-end electronics, and a sense of rudeness that took up more space than their luggage. Within a week, Bryce had claimed the second largest bedroom in the house, and Olivia had turned my old art corner into her creative studio. Mom didn't ask me how I felt about any of it. We need to make them feel at home, she said when I tried to bring it up. Don't be selfish, Ellie. I wasn't trying to be selfish. I just wanted to feel like I still mattered in my own house. Life with Mark and his kids quickly turned into a balancing act, where I was the one constantly left off the scale. Mom changed a lot. She was always running around doing things for Bryce and Olivia, taking them to soccer games, helping with school projects, buying art supplies, and I was left to fend for myself. Mark wasn't much better. He treated me like an afterthought, someone who was there but didn't really matter. He'd pat my shoulder and say things like, "Hey, kiddo," but he never tried to get to know me. Most of the time, he was too busy doting on Bryce and Olivia to notice I existed. By the time summer rolled around, I'd started spending more and more time at Aunt Marcy's house. Her little cottage felt like a safe haven, a place where I could just exist without feeling like I had to fight for space. Marcy said one evening, watching me unpack my overnight bag for what felt like the 100th time, "You don't deserve this. You know that, right?" I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. At home, things continued to get worse. Mark started taking the family on trips, but I was never invited. "You'll just be bored," Mom said when I asked why. "Besides, someone needs to take care of the house while we're gone." I spent those weekends alone, cleaning up after everyone and wondering why I wasn't good enough to be part of their perfect family. It reached a point where I got fed up with being treated like trash. So by the time junior year started, I had one clear goal: get out. I didn't know exactly how or where I'd go, but I knew I had to leave that house. Mark and Mom were busy building their new perfect family with Bryce and Olivia, and I was just a ghost that happened to haunt the same space. That year, I threw myself into school like never before. I figured if I could keep my grades up and stack my extracurriculars, I'd have a shot at getting into a good college far away. I was already working on my applications in secret. The day I brought up college was a disaster. It was a random Tuesday night, and we were all sitting around the dinner table. Mark, Bryce, and Olivia, who was scrolling through her phone, pretending to listen. I waited for a lull in the conversation before carefully speaking up. Mom, I said, trying to sound casual, I've been looking at colleges. I think I want to study business and marketing. The room went silent. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Like maybe they didn't hear me. But then Mom stared at me. College, she repeated. Yeah, I said. I've been doing research, and there are some good schools nearby. Ellie, she cut me off. We can't afford to send you to college. Yeah, sure, she can't afford it, I thought bitterly. But she can afford Mark's new laptop, Bryce's soccer cleats, and Olivia's art classes. But college for me? Suddenly, that's where the money runs out. I stood still. What? But what about Dad's savings? He always said he was putting money aside for my future. Her face shifted. That money's gone, she said flatly. Do you think raising you has been free? Food, clothes, a roof over your head? All of that costs money. Mark seemed clearly uninterested in getting involved. Bryce smirked, and Olivia didn't even bother to hide her smug grin. But, I started, you and Mark just bought a new car last month, and Olivia's taking art classes. How can there be no money left for college? Her face turned red. Don't you dare question me, she shouted. Bryce and Olivia's education is just as important as yours, if not more so. They have more potential than you. Ellie, you need to be realistic about your future. Her words hit me, and not in a good way. Realistic about my future? I shot back. What does that even mean? It means, she replied, that you need to focus on finding a job after high school. Not everyone gets to go to college, Melanie. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. College had always been the plan. Dad's plan. He used to talk about it like it was a done deal, like it was something I deserved after working hard in school. And now she was acting like it had never even been on the table. For the rest of dinner, I kept my mouth shut, pushing food around my plate while everyone else pretended like nothing had happened. I couldn't decide if I was more hurt or angry. Probably both. Later, I sat in my room, replaying the conversation over and over again in my head. The way she said, not everyone gets to go to college, kept echoing like some cruel joke. Who was everyone anyway? Did that include me? Was I supposed to just give up on my dreams because she didn't care? I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Marcy. It was late, but I knew she'd pick up. She always did. When she picked up, I broke down and told her everything. The dinner, the money, the way Mom had dismissed me like I didn't matter. Marcy listened quietly, then said, Ellie, she said, your dad would be furious if he knew what she was doing. He wanted better for you. I don't know what to do, I admitted, wiping my eyes. I can't stay here, but I don't have any other options. Come over tomorrow, we'll figure it out, she said. The next evening, I went to Marcy's after school. She met me at the door with a hug and ushered me into the kitchen, where 2 mugs of tea were already waiting on the table. When I sat down, she slid a thick envelope across the table. What's this? I asked, staring at it. Open it, she said, her voice gentle. I hesitated before peeling the envelope open. Inside was a stack of papers, bank statements mostly, all with my name on them. My hands started shaking as I flipped through them. Your dad gave me that account 2 weeks before he died, Marcy explained. He said he was worried about your mom spending it on herself, so he made me promise to keep it safe until you needed it for college. I was stunned. I think at that moment I almost burst into tears. He saved this for me? I asked. She nodded. It's not much, but it's enough to get you started. You won't have to rely on her for anything. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. At home, I didn't say a word about my plans. I figured the less Mom knew, the better. But Bryce and Olivia kept making snide comments about my future. Hey, Ellie, Bryce said one afternoon as I walked past him in the hallway. The diner downtown is hiring. Maybe you can be a dishwasher after graduation. Olivia chimed in, smirking. If you're lucky, they might let you clean the bathrooms too. I ignored them, pretending their words didn't bother me, but inside I was seething. The day I got my acceptance letter to State University, I couldn't stop smiling. It was one of the best business schools in the region, and with the scholarships I'd earned, plus the money Dad had saved, I could afford it. I told Marcy first, showing her the letter with shaking hands. I knew you could do it, she said, pulling me into a hug. Your dad would be so proud of you. At home, I kept the news to myself. Mom didn't ask about my plans, and I didn't offer any details. Letting her in felt like giving her power she didn't deserve. Then the graduation day rolled around. It came quicker than I expected. It was supposed to be a celebration, the first step toward the life I wanted. But of course, my parents had to put a damper on it. After the ceremony, as everyone else was taking photos and hugging their families, Mom and Mark pulled me aside. They didn't even wait until we got home to hit me with it. "You're 18 now, Ellie," Mark started. "We've been more than generous, but it's time for you to start thinking about your next steps." Mom added, "You'll need to find a job and figure out where you'll be living. You can't stay here forever." I stood there, stunned. They weren't even trying to hide their eagerness to get rid of me. I managed to nod and mumble something like, "I understand." I smiled calmly. "I'll be moved out by next week," before walking away. They looked confused. I think they imagined me to break down and throw a tantrum. But Mike managed to say, "Oh, well, good. That's very mature of you." That's it. They didn't even ask me where I'm planning to go. They were too relieved that I'd agreed easily. I didn't want their words to affect me, so I looked into the crowd and found Marcy. It felt like stepping into a safe harbor. She hugged me tight, whispering, "You did it, kiddo. You're going to do amazing things." I smiled through the sting of my parents' words, feeling lighter than I had in years. This wasn't just graduation day. It was my freedom day. This was the beginning of a life that was truly mine. The day I finally packed my bags, I waited until the house was empty. Marcy came to pick me up, and as I loaded everything into the back of her car, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. This was it. I was leaving, and there was no turning back. "Are you ready?" Marcy asked, watching me carefully. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." We drove to the apartment I'd arranged near campus, thanks to a combination of scholarships and the money Dad had saved. Marcy helped me unpack, giving me advice about everything from meal planning to budgeting. She even stocked my fridge with groceries before she left. As I stood in the middle of my new apartment that evening, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced before. The next few months were a whirlwind of classes, part-time work, and navigating life on my own. My university wasn't too far from home, but it felt like a completely different world. I made a few friends, including my roommate, Kayla. She was bubbly and outgoing, the kind of person who could make friends in a room full of strangers. One night, Kayla and I were sitting in our shared kitchen, eating noodles and talking about our families. "What about your parents?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "It's complicated," I replied. She nodded. "I get that. Families can be messy." That was the thing about Kayla. She didn't push. She accepted my vague answers without prying, which made it easier to open up over time. After my first semester, I finally started to feel settled. Between classes, my internship at a small marketing firm, and weekends working at a cafe, I stayed busy and away from thoughts of home. The internship was a turning point. My boss once said, "Ellie, you've got a good eye for this kind of thing. Stick with it, you've got potential." Hearing that from someone outside Marcy was the confidence boost I didn't know I needed. By senior year, I had worked my way up to a part-time role as a junior account manager while keeping my grades high. Graduation day felt surreal, with Marcy cheering louder than anyone. Soon after, I landed my first full-time job at a reputable mid-sized firm, and the opportunities only grew from there. Then came the biggest surprise. My boss called me into her office one morning. I figured it was about one of the projects I'd been leading, so I walked in with my notebook ready to take notes. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk with my name on it and said, "We've been watching your work, and the board agrees. It's time." I blinked, unsure what she meant, until she added, "We're promoting you to Senior Marketing Director." Congratulations! I opened the folder, and there it was, the official offer. My eyes immediately landed on the salary, and I froze. I mean, I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. It was way more than I'd ever imagined. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was freaking out. This wasn't just a pay bump. This was life-changing, and the perks felt like stepping into a new world. When my first bonus rolled in, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. My Honda Civic had been a loyal sidekick for years, but it was time to level up. I headed to the dealership and drove out in a black Mercedes I'd been dreaming about since college. By the time I was 30, I'd achieved more than I ever thought possible. I owned a beautiful condo downtown, drove my dream car, and had a job I loved. But most importantly, I'd built a life I was proud of. Despite everything I'd accomplished over the years, Mom hadn't reached out once. I wasn't surprised, but a small part of me had always hoped she might call or send a message, something to acknowledge my success. But silence was all I got. Sometimes, though, I found myself scrolling through their Facebook profiles, even though I knew it wasn't healthy. Mom's posts were carefully curated snapshots of a life she wanted the world to believe in. Bryce holding his soccer trophies, Olivia smiling next to her paintings, or family pictures from their latest trip to the mountains. There was never a single mention of it, as though I'd never existed. One day, I was scrolling through Mark's posts, which always made me laugh. He had this way of presenting himself like he was living the high life, though I knew better. There he'd be, standing next to his used SUV with captions like, "Hard work pays off. Feeling blessed to provide for my amazing family." I couldn't help but laugh as I read his posts while I parked in the garage of my luxury condo after closing a deal worth more than Mark probably made in a year. It wasn't that I wanted to mock him, but the gap between his performative wealth and what I'd quietly earned was almost comical. At that moment, a Facebook message popped up from my mom. It caught me completely off guard. "Ellie, it's your mother. My 53rd birthday is coming up next month, and I'm having a celebration at this fancy restaurant, Le Chateau. You've probably never even heard of it. It's not the kind of place people like you usually go to. Anyway, you'll attend, won't you? It's on the 12th at 7 p.m. Don't be late and don't embarrass me." I stared at the message, rereading it several times. The audacity was laughable. Did she really think she could summon me like nothing had happened? I debated ignoring the message altogether, but something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the urge to finally show her who I'd become without her. After sitting on it for a couple of days, I called Marcy. "She messaged me," I said as soon as she picked up. "Your mother?" she asked. "Yeah, she wants me to come to her birthday dinner next month. It's at some fancy restaurant." Marcy sighed. "Are you going?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to just block her again, but another part of me, I don't know, I kind of want to go, just to see what she wants. "Well," Marcy said, her tone careful, "if you decide to go, make sure it's on your terms, not hers." Over the next few weeks, I thought about that message more than I wanted to admit. The memory of everything she'd said and done over the years was still fresh, but there was a strange satisfaction in the idea of showing up as the successful person I'd become, someone she'd never believed in. Eventually, I decided to go. Not for her, but for me. Since I couldn't go without a gift, I made sure to choose one carefully and wrapped it in a neat small box with a bow on top. The day of the party, I left work a little early to get ready. I pulled on a sleek Chanel black dress I'd bought for a work event, simple but elegant, and slipped into a pair of heels. This wasn't about proving anything to her. It was about proving it to myself. I took a taxi to the restaurant, leaving the Mercedes parked safely at home. Le Chateau turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. Over-the-top decor, dim lighting, and a menu that probably cost more to print than the food was worth. It's the kind of place that impresses people who'd never eaten at a truly high-end restaurant. It was nothing compared to the high-class restaurants I've been to in business dinners. The hostess led me to a private room where the party was already in full swing. When I walked in, the first person I saw was Mom, sitting at the head of the table in a sequined dress that sparkled under the chandelier. Mark was next to her, looking a little older, but just as smug as I remembered. Bryce and Olivia flanked them, laughing at something while sipping sparkling water. "Ellie," Mom said, as her eyes landed on me checking my dress. "You're late." I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 7:02. "Traffic," I said simply, taking a seat at the far end of the table. The rest of the room was filled with familiar faces. Extended family I hadn't seen in over a decade. Aunt Linda was there, along with a few cousins who gave me polite nods, but didn't seem particularly interested in catching up. Mom basked in the attention, soaking up compliments about how great she looked for her age and how successful Bryce and Olivia had become. "They're such amazing kids," she gushed at one point, looking at me pointedly. "I'm so proud of everything they've accomplished." I sipped my water, refusing to take the bait. When the time of opening gifts came, the table was practically glowing with expensive wrapping paper and elaborate bows. One of my cousins handed over a fancy leather journal with gold edges. Mom smiled as she ran her fingers over it like it was some rare artifact. Aunt Linda brought a pair of crystal candle holders that caught the light, making them look way fancier than they probably were. Another relative handed her a skincare set, the kind that screams not cheap just from the packaging. The pile of gifts on the table was starting to look like a small boutique display, and Mom was absolutely eating it up. Then it was Bryce and Olivia's turn. They stood up. Olivia carried a large box, while Bryce looked smug, clearly ready to soak up the praise. "Mom," Bryce started, and it still didn't sit right hearing him call her that. "Olivia and I pooled our money to get you something special." Olivia set the box on the table with a dramatic flourish and carefully removed the wrapping, revealing a top-of-the-line luxury coffee machine, complete with all the bells and whistles. "It's the best on the market," Bryce added, his tone dripping with pride. "We figured it would be perfect for your mornings." Mom gasped, her hands flying to her chest as she stared at the machine like it was a golden trophy. Within seconds, she was in tears, pulling both of them into a tight hug. "You two are just so thoughtful," she gushed. Finally, it was my turn. All eyes turned to me as I reached into my purse and pulled out the small, neatly wrapped box. "Well, Ellie," Mom said, "is that all? Or is this just some last-minute attempt to keep up?" I gave her a fake smile and placed the box on the table, sliding it toward her slowly without a word. She picked it up, turning it over like it might bite her. "What's this supposed to be?" "Open it and see," I said, leaning back in my chair, completely unfazed by the theatrics. She slammed the box back down on the table, making the silverware rattle. "This is exactly what I'd expect from you," she spat. "You show up here in that plain dress, probably the only decent thing you own. You took a taxi, didn't you? Let me guess, you couldn't afford a car. And now you bring me this? A tiny empty box? What could possibly be in here that's worth more than a decent meal at this restaurant?" She threw it back at me. It skidded, leaving a scratch in the cheap veneer. Bryce and Olivia chuckled under their breath, clearly enjoying the show. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched the scene like it was the best entertainment they'd had all night. I picked up the box, brushing off crumbs from its elegant wrapping, and smiled at her as the room fell completely silent. "You know what's funny, Mom," I said, keeping my tone steady and calm. "This little box contains something you've probably never had." The room went dead silent. "Inside this little box is a receipt for a 2-week luxury vacation to the Maldives. First-class flights, 5-star resort, all-inclusive, all worth $17,000. Mom's face went from pale to beet red in seconds. "That's impossible," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't afford that." I tilted my head and gave her a slow, sarcastic smile. "Yeah, you'd know that if you'd bothered to keep up with my life these past 12 years. But since you didn't, let me catch you up. I'm a senior director at a top marketing firm. I own my apartment in the city. And that taxi you marked, I took it because I didn't want to leave my Mercedes to get dusted in this neighborhood. Oh, and this little trip? It's just a small gesture." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Olivia's fork slid from her hand and fell into the ground. Bryce looked stunned. "But since you're convinced I'm a loser, and you don't seem to like tiny boxes," I added, dropping the box into my purse, "I think I'll gift it to someone else." I stood up, smoothing my dress. "Enjoy the coffee machine, Mom," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hopefully it keeps you awake at night while you think about what you've missed." With that, I turned and walked out, the sharp click of my heels echoing in the stunned silence, and that felt so damn good. When I got home, I barely made it through the door before kicking off my heels and collapsing onto the couch. I didn't bother turning on the lights or even changing out of my dress. I wasn't angry or upset, I just felt drained. The next morning, the floodgates opened. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from unknown numbers. "Ellie, it's your mother. We need to talk. Call me." "Ellie, you can't just drop something like that and disappear. Please call me back." "Ellie, don't ignore me. This is important." I didn't respond to any of them. There was no need to. My mom made her decision years ago. I gave her a chance, and she didn't take it. Now I have more important things to do. I got dressed, grabbed the vacation package, and headed straight to Marcy's house. She welcomed me kindly as always. I sat in my usual spot feeling like home. When she came back with 2 steaming mugs. "So," she said, "how was it?" "Well, it was exactly what you'd expect," I said with a smile. She was her usual self. Nothing's changed. "And you? How did you handle it?" she asked. "Better than I thought I would," I admitted. I said what I needed to say, gave her a little reality check, and walked out before dessert. "Good," Marcy said, a hint of pride in her voice. "You didn't let her win." I reached into my bag and pulled out the vacation package. "This is for you," I said. She unfolded the papers, her eyes scanning the details. "Ellie," she said slowly, "what is this?" "It's a vacation package, 2 weeks in the Maldives. Flights, resort, everything. It's for you." "For me?" "Ellie, this can't be right. This is too much." "No, it's not," I said firmly. "It's exactly right. You deserve this, Marcy. You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. You've been my family, my rock. This is the least I can do to thank you." "Ellie," she said, her voice cracking, "you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," I said. "I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for you. You've been there for me every step of the way, when no one else was. Please let me do this for you." Marcy stared at me for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. Then, without a word, she leaned forward and pulled me into a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I hugged her back tightly, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "For everything," I said softly. At that moment, I realized that Marcy had been my family in every way that counted, and I'd finally learned how to be there for myself too. That was the real gift out of all this. And yeah, that's my story. Thank you guys for sticking until the end.